terms of intended use. Do you also take into account the implantables or not? Because it, okay, okay, yeah, sounds good.
I know when it happens, it all happens. So now they're going to start drilling these things, and they got the signs. So, but anyway.
I mean, I think it's a good point. I will have some discussions soon, like next week. That I'm going to one of these meetings, and I'm going to discuss with some kind of have an important opinion for the US to see if this 510K actually helps us in the way I thought might help, which is just getting some exposure that
Okay, Doc.
or just finding partners, like something like that. Just giving some credibility.
Hi guys, welcome to unexpected lesson. So today we were supposed to have Thomas and Unity lesson number 2, but Thomas got COVID and feels like crap, so I'm going to do a lesson instead. So Unity lesson is going to probably happen next Tuesday instead of this Tuesday. So if you were prepared to program and play the game and all that sort of stuff, I will disappoint you thoroughly with this lesson because it's going to be horrible. Now, also what I just noticed is that there are a couple of guys outside with the drills who decided to put our signs up for Alibaba and Upsource, which is great news, but at some point during the lesson you will hear horrible noise being a drill. Hopefully they will not drill for next hour and a half or hour, how long this is going to take. And if they give me headache, I'll just give up on life and, you know, we'll do it next time. If you are on YouTube, please say hi, okay? And I would like this lesson to be clear to everyone. So please, 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 if anything is not 100% clear, ask the question, okay? Because this is quite important to understand how it works, okay? So, what I'm going to cover is requests, so from the browser to the server, okay? And back, of course, what you are going to see. And I'm going to cover typical PHP Apache route, and then I'm going to cover Django Angular kind of route, which is much more complex, and I will try to explain how it works, even if I don't understand myself. And I will say what I think are the issues with this approach. Even if it's like new, modern, cool technology, might not be so cool after you see what I prepared. Okay? So on my screen now you can see me on google.com, and I made a request, simple search request. Okay? So this search request I asked for word testing, okay, and it gave me some results. Okay, so it doesn't matter which website we are talking about, this first part always works the same. Okay, so I have a request. Okay, this is a request which I can see in my top URL. Okay, so where that link is www.google.com/searching, question is testing, and all the other crap. Okay, so that's the request I'm sending. I can also see that request on the right here. Okay, so this is the request, and then it has some additional information like request headers. So every time when you make a request, it's not just this, but it sends some additional data. Also, it sends some data about you, so which browser you have, what's your computer name, screen resolution, stuff like that, okay? So it sends this data. And some server somewhere processes this data. I will go in details how we get to that point. But it gets the HTML as a result, which is then processed by the browser. So this request here gets HTML back. Now inside of this HTML, we have few lines, says include some CSS and JavaScript files. So then it keeps getting these additional requests, okay, to draw this page. Okay, so these are additional requests. So each one of these is processed after my first request, and each one of them works in exactly the same way that I'm going to describe. Okay, so and then more requests, and then more requests, and more requests, and so on. Okay, so of course, this being Google, it's going to make some requests to a statistics page, which say, okay, who the hell is this person visiting my website? Okay, put tracking crap on it, and so on. So for this simple page, as you can see here, probably it made, I'll just guess, around 20 requests all together. Okay. So when I make a request, when I type this in my browser, it's interesting to see when I type in my console this command trace route, okay? And I put one of our servers, alpha-appswords.org, but I will put now clear, and I will say trace route google.com, okay? And boom, 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 boom. Okay, so right now, first of all, what has to happen, okay, is that you have to connect to your router. Okay, so the first step is your router, okay, which is obviously quite fast, 6 milliseconds. Okay, and then it took 30 milliseconds to connect to this computer. And then connected to that computer, 29 milliseconds, and then went to this computer, and then to that one, that one, that one, that one, that one, and at the end, it ended up at our google.com, which this is the IP address of google.com. Okay, so it went through multiple states, multiple servers, multiple gateways, just to get to the google.com, all right? So what does this mean? It means I send a request to my router. My router then passes it on to my internet provider. In this case, this is Zego probably. So Zego then jumps around At some stage, it can be even on my computer, or depends on the configuration, it will figure out the DNS. It will use the DNS server. And DNS server translates this google.com into this IP address. Okay? So there is a service, DNS service, which every time when you make a request, whatever the text URL domain is, it has to convert it into the actual IP address of the server, so it knows where that server is. And then it finds its way through multiple steps, in this case it was 10 steps, to get to the specific google.com. And this is why we say, hey, it's very important to have end-to-end encryption, because all these steps can be hacked or listened to and so on. So the data that you send might not be secure. Of course, it isn't. So I just want to show you that this sometimes can be much longer.
Yeah.
Depends where the servers are. And depending on the configuration of the servers, you might have additional servers, like, because this is running in a cloud. Okay, so you might have DigitalOcean if you're using DigitalOcean, or Amazon Web Services. Okay, so you can go to their main router and then it figures out which server it is on, but the data can be on multiple servers. So this is just the tip of the iceberg. Okay, so this is the direct line from me to first point of Google. Okay, but then behind that there is a whole forest of these things. All clear? Okay, so when I make my request, okay, I have to have something listening to this request, okay, on my server, whatever that is. So I can have load balancing server. Okay, so let's say it hits load balancing server and says, okay, some of the requests will go here, some of them will be here, okay? But I'm going to use a simple single server to explain what I'm explaining right now, okay? Single server. So as I say, it can be more complex, okay? So when you type your browser URL, okay, and you press enter, then all those things happen what I just described. So it goes from one little device, router, gateway, server to another one. It translates this URL into IP address, and then it hits the server on my IP that I just mentioned. Now the server has to run an application which listens on the agreed port, okay? The agreed port is going to be either 80 for HTTP requests, or 443 typically for HTTPS requests, okay? In the case of AppSource, and 70% other of the websites, we have Apache, okay? So Apache listens to this request, okay? When it gets request, it checks, okay, what is behind the slash. So appsource.org, that's my server IP address translated with DNS. All this after the slash is part of the request. So Apache checks, is this a directory or file?
But where? On the other side? Or on your
This is on the server. So on my server, I got this request. It checks, does it have this path, folders like that? Typically, it's going to be var www.html. So it checks, do I have my admin / my files / entry PHP file? If it has that file, then it will open that specific file. If it's directories like /my blog, it will open the directory. Okay? So this is how Apache on AppSource is set up, and this is typical setup, okay? Find the file, open that file, start executing that file, whatever that file is doing. However, if that is not file or directory, which most AppSource requests aren't, okay, then it will go to index PHP of our Laravel application. Okay, so that's how it's set up, Apache config. Do that or that, okay? So index PHP will launch Laravel application, which checks various things, okay? It checks, do you already have a session? Did you visit this site 3 seconds ago? Are you logged in? Is the website in some sort of maintenance mode? So I just show you maintenance page. It will check stuff like, are all the services and files available? Do I have a connection to the database? It will check that sort of stuff, okay? So if it's fine, then it will load our web roots, okay? So we have one file where all the roots are, okay? So then the rest of this thing is processed here. So we typically have one root which connects to one controller and one function in that controller. So that's very simple. That function gets executed, okay? And as a result, typically, it will return HTML, it will return a view, which then goes to the browser, and browser can display it. Of course, if that view says load more HTML, CSS files and JavaScript files, it will load those. It will make another request, and the same process will go again and again. So if you say in this HTML view, load core.css file, okay? So this, the browser will ask for this file. It will go through those 10 steps or more. Again, decode DNS, and it will hit our Apache. And it will say, is this a directory or file? Does this file, core.css, exist? It will say, yeah, it does. Well, just give it to it, okay?
It does back at the user side. Why doesn't it just send everything also with dependencies from the server side?
Haha, that's a very smart question, because it's stupid. So HTTP 1.1 protocol, where most websites are working, because that's the only protocol that we have, does exactly that, okay? One by one. Now, we have more intelligent plugin for Apache, HTTP2, which was developed by Google developers, but that's not official standard, even if lots of sites use it, which kind of reads the HTML, which it sends back to it and figures out, hey, you will ask for this CSS and this and this and this, so let me bundle that all together and send you that as one bundle, okay? So the way that I set up Apache on AppSource is to use HTTP tool, okay, which does that. However, it does require HTTPS to work. So you don't see it on your local machines, okay? So there is that smart bit, somebody thought of it, so it's a good question, but it's not a common standard, okay? And that's it. That's the whole logic how AppSource works. Or any other single server website, okay? That's how it works. Is it clear? Any questions? Because now we are going to talk about the other side, the dark side of the moon, okay? So if I have a typical Python setup, okay, the same thing applies. Python, Django, Angular kind of thing, okay? So you type the URL in the browser, you press enter. Okay, same thing happens. This URL that you typed has to be decoded, DNS, so it finds the IP, it goes through all these gateways, finds that server, and it has some server application which listens on agreed ports, which are 40 or 433 if it's HTTPS request. That's Nginx. Good?
So it's the same as Apache or?
Yeah, Nginx is stripped down version of Apache. Okay, so basically it has less features, but it's faster. Okay, so Nginx, less features, faster. All right, but same thing. Now, how Nginx is configured, this is a very, very problematic thing, okay? Because what we have is actually 3 websites running simultaneously. I have 3 servers running simultaneously as a service, okay? So in this case, it's these 3 here, okay? These 3 square boxes, all right? So I have different servers, which of course cannot run on the same port as Nginx. Nginx is listening on 80 and 443. So this one, this dashboard, will work on, let's say, port 5000. Then this shop one will work on 5001, and then employee one will work on 5002 port. Okay, so basically it's server of its own. It's like Nginx capable of, or Apache, of taking the request, processing, and returning the data back. Okay, so this is more complex than Nginx, more complex than Apache, because of course it is the whole thing here, okay? So it is Apache plus routing plus controllers plus returning the views, okay? So each one of these does the whole thing. But I already have something which is doing Apache's job here, which is Nginx. So this duplicates that job. Because of course it can't run on port 80 or 443, it runs on different ports. But then I have to access it by typing URL, whatever it is, column 5000 or column 5001 or column 5002, which is not very user friendly. Okay? So for that reason, we make a proxy. Okay? So we say every request made to port 443 pass on to port 5000. And then we have a reverse proxy which says if this port 5000 wants to send some data, you know, so we can send the data back. So it's back and forth, it's two-way. Receive, send, okay? Now the problem is that this is not one-to-one relationship. It's not everything from 80 go to 5000, or everything for 443 if you have HTTPS go to 5000, because we have 3 of them, or we can have more. So we have to have something in between to do additional routing. So if the URL says, let's say, for simplicity, shop inside, then everything that has shop sent to 5001. Everything that has employee sent to 5002, and everything what is the rest sent to 5000. Okay? So for that, I need to have thing called Gunicorn. All right? So Nginx passes all the stuff to Gunicorn, which has to run as additional service, okay, and figure out where to proxy these requests. Okay? So what happens here in one of these, let's say, shop? Okay, so this is an Angular application, okay, which means it's JavaScript, which means it's Node.js. Okay? So, which means all those problems that we described before with installing dependencies and so on. Doesn't work really well, especially 2 years later when you try to update and half of the stuff is hacked, broken, abandoned, and so on, and then you have a problem. All right? So this thing receives a request. So our request, which came through all this journey, past the proxy, past the Gunicon, comes here. Okay? So of course, this inside of itself has its own roots. So it analyzes part of the request. Okay, so I know this is a shop, but then do you want shop, I don't know, create new, or shop login, or shop sign up, or shop show me reports, whatever it is. Okay, so it deals with those requests. Okay, and then it returns, what it returns here, I say it returns basic HTML file, extremely simple HTML file, and in that HTML file it adds few JavaScript components, okay, JavaScript files, and those JavaScript files draw the whole page on the client side. Okay, so this page gets drawn in the browser. So when the browser gets this HTML, the only thing what it does, it says, aha, there is some JavaScript that I need to execute, and this JavaScript then starts working what it's supposed to do, okay? Typically what it is supposed to do is like, well, first of all, get me some CSS and so on. So then this whole process of, just like here, finds the CSS, if its directory or file exists, Nginx will give that specific file to it, all right? So that's not a problem, but it is because the file is inside of here, so I have to proxy that shit again and again, okay? Now the problem is this Angular app is not connected to data. All right? This has no data in it. So it doesn't know who is the logged in user, it doesn't know anything at this stage. It has to figure all this sort of stuff. So if you are saying, okay, show me shop, what products do you have, it doesn't know what products does it have. But what it then does, it says, I can make an API call to the some sort of thing which will give me the data. All right? So now that is our Django server, okay? So Django is our backend server, which again runs on specific port. I can't run on 5000, 5001, 5002. Of course, I can change it. They can be 6000, doesn't matter, whatever number, okay? So it has to have its own port. It has to have all this proxy crap, okay, because it can't be accessed directly. Because this is executed, remember, on the front end. So your front end must make a request through all those steps, resolve the DNS and all the other stuff, go through Nginx, go to Gunicon, come to Django, and then Django says, okay, well, here are the products you asked for. Then it sends it back, where? Well, it sends it back to the JavaScript which called it, and then the JavaScript can update the page, put the descriptions, the prices of the products, whatever this is supposed to do. So I update the page. Of course, on a typical page, you don't just have a list of products, you have the user who is logged in and many other things. So it might make multiple calls to this backend, which of course is much slower, okay? It can't be optimized like HTTP2, just like I described, easily, all right? If I multiply this by a million and multiply that by a million, then you can see a huge number of requests which slows down the whole process. And if we are talking about single server, this one will struggle quite a lot. Not to mention that I have multiple points of failure. Okay, here, if Laravel works, you will get your response. Here, if Gunicon doesn't work, you won't get response. If the shop doesn't work, you won't get Django API doesn't work, if engine, multiple points of failure. Okay, and of course, this is not the only one which is running on the back end, because I also have verifiers. So if I send some data to the server, then it has to have additional service which will check the data which I just sent to you before it. Okay? So who is calling the verifier? No. Same thing, JavaScript from your browser.
What was required? Why do you need?
So if you post data, so I'm filling in the form, and I want something to verify this before I process it, you can have it as a separate little service. Okay? Now there are two more things here. Okay? Because you want, for additional security of this system, which obviously the more components you have, it's less likely to be secure, especially with Node.js and all those millions of files that it pulls to build your Angular page, which can be cracked and hacked, and you need to keep it up to date, which for dependency is not very good. So you want to run this, in some sort of sandboxed environment. Okay? So it's disconnected from the rest of the system. So sandbox, so it's kind of like closed. Okay? So this is virtual env, all right, that you guys have run into. So it gives this additional layer of security. It also can do another thing, just like if you heard of Docker, can easily create various configurations, okay, without you needing to install the whole system. So you can simulate like local production development modes and load different types of Node.js files depending on the type of environment. So let's say you are in production and you want to debug, you can load additional logging stuff which you don't want to have inside of your production environment. Okay, so you can kind of, it's easy to switch from one environment to the other. Of course, in Laravel, I just have a .env file where I say production development and does exactly the same thing, much simpler, but it is less powerful than this one. But this one is quite complex. And then I have another thing what has to run at the same time is background services. Okay? Background services in this configuration are typically run by cron job. So every X minutes I can call a PHP file and have it executed. So that's as simple as that. So every minute I call the same file, say, do you have any emails? If you have them, send them. Okay, very simple. Here I have to install another application called Celery, which will process all those background tasks and then do stuff like sending emails. Okay, so does this make sense? Do you perfectly understand how it works?
Why, in general, do you need multiple points? Maybe not for this, but is it that you can use the same endpoint or something?
Well, you need multiple ports. Why do you need multiple ports? You need multiple ports because each app, server app, wants to listen to incoming requests. Okay, so be able to receive them. If I have all the apps listening on the same port and the request comes in, then you don't know which one of the apps should process that. Okay? So this is why it's much better if each app has its own port. Like database, MySQL, listens on port typically 3306. So everything what comes on 3306 would be processed by MySQL. So you're not going to send a request like, execute some JavaScript on MySQL because MySQL can't process that. Okay? But, of course, if you have multiple ports running at the same time, yeah, but that's everywhere. But more components that you have, it's more likely that one of them will fail. Okay? However, it's not a problem to have stuff on multiple ports, but to end user, I have to only open port 443 if I have HTTPS on a web server. On this configuration, I have to have 443. Let's say I ban all the HTTP traffic because it's not end-to-end encrypted. That means that I don't want to risk it. Okay, so forget about port 80 in production. So everything goes on 443, but I actually have 3 web servers in this configuration running, plus these 2. Okay, so they all process the HTTP requests. Okay, so this is why I need a unicorn to transfer, to figure out which one of these wants it.
So it's like a handler for the server?
It is a handler, it is a router. It's a router which says, okay, which one of these, because you have to run them in parallel. Okay? Does it answer your question? Any other questions before I move on slightly? Is it really clear? Can you explain this back to me if I ask you how it works?
So now, for example, if the emails are not sending, then will it be a problem from Celery or could it be a problem from something else?
That's a brilliant question. So the question is, if emails are not sending, where is the problem? Okay? So is it the problem with Celery? Yes, that's your first point of check. So what is the Celery saying? What are the logs? Are the background tasks getting executed or not? Okay? But who is telling Celery to send the email? Well, it gets through some of the ports, it gets some instruction, okay? But who is sending the request to send the email?
The API.
You are saying Django, the API, okay? But Django is processing the API. Who is calling that API? The JavaScript, okay? So how does it work? Because JavaScript is executed in a browser. So how does the background tasks work? So let's say you want to send an email to the shop at midnight to say, well, this is your turnover for today. Okay? So I want to have a background task to send an email. Okay? There is no browser. There is no JavaScript. Okay? This doesn't come from front end. This doesn't come from the user. This is a backend task. So I have to. So this guy is telling me it comes from Django, from the API, but Django doesn't do this. It listens and serves the APIs to the front end, which is basically not directly from the user, but it's from the JavaScript on the page that user opened. Okay, so as you can see, I need to program something here in order to get that information. Okay, so let's say every midnight you run this. Okay, you need to send this email. Okay, fine. But who do I where do I get the data from? Okay, I have to say, dear Andre, your shop called AppsWars has sold 50 training sessions. Okay, so I have to get that from the database. So I have to get it from the Django. So this guy will call the API, hopefully internally, so it doesn't go through this whole process. So it says if they are on the same server, I can call localhost, and then this one will give it the data, so this one will compress the email and then send it at the back. Okay, so if the background service such as email doesn't work, it should be something internal. So this one is relatively simple. Any other questions? So you all are confident you can explain this back to me if I ask you? Because I will ask you tomorrow to explain this diagram back to me. I'll take you to the room over there so nobody can help you, and I will keep you in that room till you explain the diagram to me. So any questions?
Is the link between JavaScript and Django? Because I thought you didn't need to pass JavaScript. You can just do Django only.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I can do Django only. I'm describing the configuration that most of the guys are here using. Okay, so I can use Django independently. I don't need all this Angular crap, you know. And the Django might serve me the front pages as well. Okay, which is a simpler solution. But that's not the use case that we have here. The use case is unfortunately like that. Any other questions? People on the chat are not responding. Maybe there's nobody on the chat. They're all disappointed because it's not Unity, it's this complex structure. So I will move on, guys, but please, if it's unclear, okay, ask me a question. So, when I write a code for the structure on the left, okay, for the PHP, every time when I make a request from my computer, I say go to localhost. Or I can put, let's say, appswas.com, which I edited host files, so it kind of skips these 10 steps, this trace route. So it immediately resolves it to the local host, so it doesn't go anywhere, it stays on your machine, okay? That works in both cases, all right? So I access local host, I access it on port 80. I can't access it on port 443 because I can't install SSL certificates on my local machine. Why? Because my IP of the local machine keeps changing. I can simulate the SSL, but that's beside the point, okay? So on your local machine, typically you have HTTP because you can't install SSL. So when you make a request on your machine, okay, Apache each time does exactly the same thing, logs the PHP files that it requires. So if I made a change on the backend, Apache will load the new version of PHP file, and every time when I make a change, this will be updated. Okay? If I make a change on a front end in a CSS file, for example, I refresh the page, probably in the first time that you do that, it will actually cache the files that you are asking for, so you will not see the thing immediately, and then you just say F5 hard refresh or uncheck the box for caching, and then it will load all those changes immediately. So it makes it so easy for me to make a change and so on. However, okay, if I make a change in Angular, all right, I'm making a change in a JavaScript file, which again, first thing first, it might be cached, just like CSS in your browser, so you need to disable caching in the browser, okay? The second thing is that every change that I make in Angular means that I have to reload the JavaScripts, which there are services which do that, so you make a change, there is a little, on Mac it's Watchman, and there are other little services that you can have running which will, you made a change in your code, I'm monitoring these files on your computer, so I will quickly recompile them and then tell browser to reload the page. So you can see this change immediately when you are developing the front end, okay? But because there are millions of JavaScript files, in this case they are TypeScript, but that's exactly the same, you know, it's just slightly, few slight differences, okay? These JavaScript files, you know how they say import, 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 lots of other files, okay? And quite a lot of those files are those Node.js modules, which also say import, 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 okay? So basically, you are loading like thousands of files, okay, with every request. On your local machine, that's fine. But that's not very good in production. So what I have to do for production is compile all these JavaScript files and then upload them to the server, okay? So I have to compile those files and upload them to the server, okay? And then you have files with the weird names. So the files that you have are compressed. They are typically not readable on the server because, you know, if you put big names of variables, they will be replaced with ABCs and so on. So they try to compress them as much as possible. Okay, so then you have that file, JavaScript, you open it, and it's one line of text which goes forever. So all these files are compressed, and then you upload them to the server. Okay, that doesn't happen in PHP, okay? But PHP is a backend, JavaScript is a front end. So inside of Laravel, I can use for the front end Angular if I want to, okay? It adds a level of complexity which I just described. So I can compress these Angular files, and then those Angular files will have to call the APIs, PHP in this case, and get the data they need. For me, that's reverse of Laravel and what these guys at PHP stand for, and for me, that's a worse practice. I can also use Vue.js and all the others similar frameworks for front end, which always work the same. You load HTML loads that Angular or Vue.js file which has to be compiled, and then that one makes a request to the backend, say, send me this, send me that, okay? Which is fine, it can be worked on the left, we are not doing that, but it can. On this side, this can't be replaced. This is how it works. When you have the Angular has to be compiled, so you are not uploading your code as it is to the server. You have to compile it, and then that's what gets executed. But then on the server, if something doesn't work, it's extremely hard to see why it doesn't work, okay? Now the backend, Django is in Python, okay? And Python, PHP, similar. You can argue, you know, this one is easier to type, this one is easier to read, but this one doesn't need semicolon, this one doesn't need tabs. Same stuff. It's kind of personal preference, okay? However, in this configuration, the changes that I'm making to Python are not straight away visible. Okay, this is a problem. I can again add additional little file to monitor did I make a change in order to update my stuff every single time when I make a change to the back end. So not a big problem. Django is fine, Python is fine. It works fine, but in this configuration, I really am asking myself why these decisions were made. Especially when you think that these three front ends are not three separate websites. They are not for three different types of users. They are same website connected to the same APIs, connected to the same database. So why those three? Why these three can't be one? Why those three can't be one? And they can.
Isn't verifier also with them?
Verifier is backend, okay?
So if they are, even if the three are one, you cannot put verifier as well?
Give me a second to come back to verifier, okay? So these three can be one. What is the only reason why I want to have these three as a separate? Well, there are two reasons that people argue, okay? First reason is that this is very modular. So if I have another website that I'm building for a different client, and I have the employee exactly like this, I can take this front-end module because it's not connected to the back-end. Really, it's not integrated, it just has one URL which keeps calling, so I can easily change the URL, and it will talk to a different backend. Okay, so I can unplug this and move it to the different websites.
Can it then still do both websites at the same time?
Well, it's the copy of the code. One copy does one website, the other one does the other website. Nobody is telling JavaScript that it can't call different.
So it's just a clone, it's not like the same thing, but you took it to the other.
Yeah, but it's easy to clone it. Of course, if that other website requires exactly the same functionality as this one, which it never does. So I do have to modify it. But if I have an employee module here, with employee controller and employee views, I can take those out. Yes, slightly more complex, but I can take them out and put them in a different website. And then I can modify them to suit their needs. So this first argument that you can easily reuse the code, I don't think that's the case, because you decouple the front end, but the back end you still have to write on the other website. And if the back end is the same, why did you, then you can copy the whole thing. There is no need for us to break this down.
Yeah.
Now the other thing is that if I take this employee module out and put a different employee module in on my website, theoretically it can work, okay? But it's not going to work because if different employee module calls different types of APIs which my Django doesn't have, then it's not going to work even if I change the URL. I can have exactly the same API calls, but different look. Okay, so I can swap these models around with different looks, okay, different user experience, UI. But I can also do that just by changing CSS files. I don't need to replace the whole module. So that advantage for me is not a real advantage. Now there is quite a lot of duplication here because these three websites, in our case, look exactly the same. So all the user interface is the same, so I'm actually copying 3 times. So if I want to change the blue color to green color of this website, well, I have to change it in 3 different places. Because these are 3 independent things from each other. So I don't think this approach is better.
If we're copying like the project, as you said, so like the front end is similar, can we copy all of them into one?
Well, you can merge them, okay, but each one of them has its own roots, okay? So you have to edit the root files and copy these ones from here to there, from there to there, and then you have to, in your source code, because each page has its own folder, so you have to copy those folders. But because these were separate, maybe you called page home page in each one of them. Now, you can't have 3 home pages, so you have to rename 2 of them, rename all the names and refactor the whole code. So merging these 3 together is not like a 5-minute job. Otherwise, I would say just merge them and get rid of the other 2. Especially because this employee one has like 2.5 pages altogether. So why is it a separate one? Why can't it be part of shop or whatever? I don't know. I don't know what developers are thinking. It's good to compartmentalize things, so you have nice individual little things which do one little task. But if you overdo it, then you have a problem because you have lots of code being copied, repeated in different tasks. It has to make multiple changes, multiple points of failure. You know, so if you have a very complex structure, then you would do this. If you are google.com and you have Google Play and Google Search and Google this, you would like these to be separate applications where you share certain components and stuff like that, you know, so Gmail and so on. So Google will do this. And for them it might make sense to have separate services running on separate servers and so on. For one smaller business, no sense. Because this verifier, you can break it down in 3 verifiers. Why not? One verifies this, one verifies that, you know. Pointless. You can add verify inside the Django, so every time when you call the API, you say, well, check is this data submitted correctly, if the email is really email, so I don't need it really. So Django can report back to JavaScript while when the post request is made. Yep, that's fine, or that's not fine. So I don't understand what verifier, why is it a separate controller? Yeah, you can say I can decouple it, I can swap this verifier with another verifier, and I can reuse this verifier somewhere else, but that applies to any part of the code. You can, but it's not going to be exactly the same. You still have to make changes and adjustments, so you're not really saving. It's not just plug and play. Now let's go to the last topic that I want to cover today, and it's not going to take too long, okay, is how the hell do I debug this on my local machine, and how the hell do I debug this on the server, okay? So if I want to debug this on my local machine, okay, I obviously have the browser where I can see the console log, so everything but front-end throws I can see inside the console log, okay? So it applies for both things, okay? So the JavaScript that I run, okay, will be shown in console log of a console of the browser. However, okay, if I have less JavaScript, which is on the left, okay, so it is going to be simpler for me to see what that JavaScript is doing. Also, this JavaScript on both machines is not going to be compressed and compiled, so I can actually see the code, okay, and I can put the breakpoints in JavaScript, and I can see what the variables are doing and so on. If you don't know how to do that, we can show that. Maybe you can ask Thomas to show you these things, because he knows few tricks better than me. But in your this guy, you can use debugger, you can see the JavaScripts, you can put the breakpoints, you can see the variables, it's all there, okay? So that's not too much of a problem. When you compile the JavaScript on the server side, of course, you can't see anything. It's extremely impossible to see both of these. And you would compile the JavaScript even in the left-hand side, okay, on our Apache thing, because it's smaller and it will hopefully execute faster, and it will have, instead of 20 files, it will have 2. On this one, instead of 2,000 files, it will have 30, okay, but on the server side, it's much harder to see what's going on. So we tend to put many more console logs, which is useful unless you're console logging people's passwords and credit cards, and you forget to take them off, and you have on a production something which just keeps printing that out every single time. So console log users. I click and I'm like, 5,000 users. And then they say, hey, we leaked some information. Yes, of course you leaked some information. So the front-end JavaScript, you would typically debug inside the browser. If you want to debug stuff on the backend, I need to, in PHP case, install a Xdebug plugin, which attaches itself to the PHP engine. So it doesn't matter which PHP file I call, this is always processed by a PHP engine. So PHP engine processes the file and executes those commands. Okay, that's what it does. But if I attach to that engine a debugger, okay, then it's also going to have a great insight at every single step of that process. And I can easily see that debugger in my Xcode or VS Code, Xcode, in my VS Code or whatever I'm using, okay? And I can put the breakpoints and stop there and so on. But if I have a multiple thing where my business logic is spread in Python, Django, and this verifier, if I have this background tasks, if I have Angular, okay, where am I going to attach this browser, this thing? I can't attach, So I can debug Python, that's not a problem. I can install stuff to debug Python, but I'm just seeing very small part of the whole process, okay? I still don't see all the communication, where is my data going, who is processing, and where is it failing. I don't see that, okay? I can call the API in both cases with Postman and see what they return, but that's not debugging, I just have some insight into data. I can check the logs, but while I have Apache log and PHP log, or Laravel log, I have two of them, and then MySQL maybe as third one. In this case, I have multiple logs in multiple places. Yeah, so Nginx has its own log, Unicorn will have its log, etc., etc. So for me to debug this thing is much harder, okay? It's multiple points of failure, so I need to check many more times, many more places, and then I have to remember, oh my God, this guy is doing this, I need to send it to that, and you know, it just slows down the process, and then you lose your train of thought, so you have to repeat it again and again, okay? So, over-complicating these structures, architectures of your back-end and front-end is sometimes a horrible idea. I can't see a single gain of this infrastructure on the right. Even if Python is the best possible programming language, it's 10 times easier to write in a PHP, all this other stuff makes the choice horrible, you know, because it's not, you are just writing APIs. Everything else might crash and it'll take you much longer, so you're not gaining anything. The stuff that you have Angular here as a front end, well, we said we can have a Django front end, but you can also have Angular front end on the left, you know, if you insist on having Angular or Vue.js or any others. The choice of database on the right is Postgres, I think, and on the left is MySQL, but it doesn't matter, you know, you make a call, give me this data, it gives you this data.
It's easier to see MySQL database.
Well, you can see Postgres database, you have applications where you can open it and see the data inside. The Django has Django admin, which you can see all your models and stuff like that, which is kind of nice, nice thing. In AppSource, we have that MyAdmin Utilities database, which is a plugin like PHP MyAdmin or AdMiner or something like that, open source, which gives you that inside the browser. You can put the same thing in this concept. Have some sort of AdMiner which will connect that and see the database. It's not that you can't have the database, you know, I don't think there is a difference inside the database. I'm sure that Django can work with MySQL, same thing like Laravel can work with Postgres. Now the differences between them, of course, they are optimized for different things, so it depends on your data, one or the other might work faster or slower. But let me throw in the last bit of crap. You know what these are? Oh yeah, typically they are database, sorry. Yeah. Just to make our life completely, utterly miserable on the right-hand side, we also have 4 blockchain servers, 4 nodes. Okay, so they talk to each other, they exchange the data, they make all that blockchain stuff. But one of them has the APIs. So this guy calls the APIs here to check when this guy wants to pay this guy some money, then we have to go through all this thing to verify what's their wallet, what's their private key, to make sure they have enough money in order to make transactions. So
Where are they? On the server as well?
there are servers, they are.
Yeah,
Yeah, there are different servers, so we have 4 virtual machines. Minimum recommended is to have 4. You probably need 20 to run a private blockchain technology. And then one of them must have API, which only talks to our backend server. Okay, so when this guy is using this dashboard and wants to make a payment through the wallet, then the JavaScript has to call this API, which obviously goes to the whole thing. This one says, oh, I need to make API, so he calls this guy through another whole API, which identifies this guy, say, yeah, that's fine, okay, so I'll process your request. Then he processes the request, computer says no, tells this guy it's no, then it tells this guy it's no, and then finally our user has no. Oh yes, you have. And then the shop wants to see that the guy paid, so this makes request to. Shall I make it more complex? Of course, we also have a mobile API, mobile app. And mobile app is also Angular. In this case, it's Ionic framework, but it's Angular, okay? So basically this mobile app does, it's like this pod, but it's just not running on this same server, so it's like a combination of browser and these things. So it's like front end, but it also has to make requests to here. Yeah, so it calls that, it's not browser URL, but it's API URL, which goes to Nginx, which goes here, which goes there, then it gets some data, goes back, displays the information, and so on. Clear?
yeah.
Perfect.
That's like one thing, and then the fact that you have to restart Lincoln every time you want to do an edit is something else.
You don't have to restart it, you can put something that will modify
You need
to.
to run the virtual environment and run like a command that will auto reload.
Yeah, you can say auto reload and it will auto reload. There is, as I mentioned, a way that you don't have to restart Nginx every time when you make a change to the backend. That's fine. And same thing is for the front end. You can monitor the code and reload the JavaScripts. So that's fine. Okay, I can live with that, with those reloads. Wait 1 second and then boom, it's up and running. I can see my changes, so that's not that horrible. But when you think how many things you have to run at the same time, and how they all communicate together, and how you have to configure each one to work with the other, that is very, very hard, very easy to lose yourself where you are, where the track is, where the data is, who has which piece of information and so on. When you look at the code, it is multiple folders for me, no benefits. It's not, this is not faster, this is slower to execute, because there are many more requests and many more components, so it cannot be faster, even if Nginx on its own is faster than Apache, but it's, this is not faster, this is not, in that case, more scalable. It's not faster to program in it, quite the opposite. It's not faster to debug. It's not easier to debug, it's actually quite the opposite.
This is only better if they are not related, right? So like if the shop is not related to employee, they're like two separate applications that don't really communicate.
Well, that would make more sense But that is what we have on the right in the apps force, because every folder is a different application which may or may not communicate. So you have /my documentation, /my admin, /my blog, and so on, or AI SIHA that we used before. It's a separate application. But the way that we made them communicate is like, well, AI SIHA is using the graphics from my admin. It doesn't need to copy the whole thing. Because you load the same CSS files, can also access its database directly and read all the data itself. So even if that is the case, and nobody is stopping us to compartmentalize this and put AI SIHA on one server, my admin on the other one, my blog on the third one, that will also work, if we really want to.
Is it more secure in Nginx? Like the whole thing?
Listen, Nginx is extremely simple application, okay? So I would say that Nginx is not your concern about security. Apache, same thing, okay? They developed Apache 28 years ago, they came to version 2.3, okay? So there's not a lot to update on Apache or Nginx. The problem with security, the worst problem with security is two things. The amount of third-party modules that you are using, which in Node.js is hundreds and thousands. I think I showed you one example. I had 2,000 files for one simple thing. So I can't verify each one of them that I know who wrote it and that it passed all the security tests. So that is a huge problem. The second problem is the developers who might leave shit in the consoles and other stuff, okay, because you can't control all these things. So when we ran some tests, we found multiple security issues. We had to hire a company to do this professionally, and they did, and they produced log reports, so we fixed that, and then they tested again, and so on and so on. So we managed to make this platform secure in a case, but it was a long, hard job. But it didn't stop our very early developer to put one of the passwords as password, and somebody guessed it and then hacked the whole staging server. You know, so yeah, luckily we had no information, but it did cost us a week or 10 days to rebuild crap. So security is harder when you have multiple components. But, you know, if you want to keep the secret between two of us, you know how it works. I have to kill you, and then, yeah. Any other questions? No. Good. Well, I hope it was beneficial. Tomorrow we'll have a quiz, and I'll ask you to explain this back to me. So if you take a snapshot of this lovely document, maybe it will help you. It won't? No? You gave up. So that's it for today, and hopefully Thomas will get better and be with us next Tuesday. But on Thursday we have AI session with Sam, so that might be fun, more than this. I'm sure that AI is much more simpler to understand and make it work than this little thing. Anyway, guys, thank you very much, and talk to you soon. Bye-bye.